What is going on, investors? Hope the guys are doing well out there. It is Friday. The weekend is here, and it's also time for the FAANG Saga Recap Show here on the Investor Channel, where every Friday we recap all of the major news and the technical chart patterns from all the major FAANG stocks. This week, we are just 6 days away from getting earnings from Netflix, really kicking off the earnings season for the major technology companies. We have a bunch of custom silicon news, and Apple finally caught a bid. We'll have to look at that from a technical perspective, but better kick things off like we always do with Meta Platforms. Start of the week at 522. Social media giant slipping down about 2% to finish the week at 511.90. Now, TikTok's got a bill floating around in the U.S. Senate, and it is, I believe, out of the House of Representatives. It got kicked over to the United States Senate. They're figuring out what they want to do with this bill, and one thing that they're thinking about doing is extending the time that ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, has to divest the asset. I think inside the bill, it gives us about a 6-month time frame, and the Senate is thinking maybe a year is more appropriate. Now, for what it's worth, ByteDance has indicated it has no plans to divest TikTok, even if the bill becomes law, essentially saying that they're going to thumb their nose to the United States government and the law. Also, former President Trump, who was once behind a push to have this go into effect in his presidency, looks like he's kind of flip-flopped as he has major donors from ByteDance filling his pockets with a little bit of money. Now, Meta reveals its AI custom-made chips will become available. Now, this was interesting. We actually did a video of this early this morning on our other channel, and shout out to everybody that went over to the Bleeding Edge newsletter over the last week. We went from like 0 subscribers all the way up to 750. Love to get to 1,000 by next week. I'll have a link down in the description below to our new channel where we're posting videos 3 days a week. So we talked about Meta is coming out with these new chips. Now, they're not going to directly replace NVIDIA chips like chip for chip, but Meta is well ahead of schedule here. They're already on version 2 of the chip. When they announced this in 2023, they weren't expecting version 1 to come out till 2025. So they're a year ahead of schedule, and they're already on version 2. More custom silicon is on the way. Now, Meta's vice president says its newest large language model, the Llama 3, will appear in really just the next couple of weeks. So this is citing for the large language community, as the Llama 2 model is one of the most popular open source models, and we'll see if Llama 3 catches on like the previous one did. Moving on to Apple, start of the week at 168 and some change, and the iPhone maker popping up 4.7%. Finish the week at 176.55. You're definitely going to want to see this from a technical perspective. Now, Apple's going to focus on its M4 chips as it's going to roll these out to its Macintosh computers and laptops over the next year. I tell you what, I'm still on an M1 Apple chip, and it's still easily the best computer I've ever owned. These M4 chips, once they come out, maybe they've got some AI capabilities built in. We'll see what happens. But my guess is maybe they'll do a little bit to boost Mac sales, but I don't think it's going to be a big one. Now, Apple's going to allow their users to get their iPhones fixed with used parts. So you can already repair your iPhone using maybe genuine or OEM parts, if you will. If you crack your screen or one of the buttons doesn't work or something like that, or the speaker goes out, you can replace that. And Apple has kind of pushed into that. Part of it is, I think there was some legislation that was passed that is almost requiring Apple to do that. But there's also kind of an environmental impact to this as well. There's no reason necessarily to go and buy a brand new phone if fixing it does the job. Now, obviously, maybe you get a little bit of revenue flowing to Apple in terms of OEM parts, but what this could do is, again, extend the life of people's phones. So every year, they're not having to buy a $1,000 phone, and most people aren't anyways. Now, Apple is assembling 1 in 7 of its iPhones in the great country of India. That totals to about 14% of the iPhones are being made in India. And my guess, we sit here a year from now, that number is going to be at least in the 20% range. Now, moving on to Amazon, start of the week at 185 and some change. Basically slid sideways or just up fractionally at Amazon. Finished the week at 186. We've got the CEO putting out a shareholder letter ahead of earnings just a couple of weeks from now. And the CEO hit it right on the head. He said that iRobot regulation turned a $1 billion company into a sad story, and I couldn't agree more. Amazon agreed to buy iRobot, the vacuum maker, for $1.4 billion, and regulators of your great country here in the United States said, no, you can't buy a $1 billion robot vacuum maker, and now the iRobot Corporation is worth $261 million. They've announced layoffs, and they've really shrunk their operations. And it's all because the government said, look, Microsoft, you can buy OpenAI, you can buy Activision Blizzards for 10 times, 50 times this amount. But for some reason, Amazon was not allowed to buy a robot vacuum cleaner. Maybe it's because people are worried that robots might be stealing jobs, but as of right now, Amazon executives saying that is a myth, as robots are more supplementing, if you will, and working alongside humans. I think that's probably the case for the next couple of years. Longer term, companies like Amazon are absolutely going to be replacing low-end, low-skill labor with robots. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, the company says consumers are trading down on their spending. So maybe instead of buying the brand name of something or buying maybe the more expensive version or whatever it might be, they're actually starting to see trading down as, again, we're seeing signs of the economy. We did a video on JP Morgan on the main channel here. Consumers are struggling. Their credit card debt is starting to rise. Deposits at these large major banks, those are starting to shrivel up a little bit. And eventually you're going to get the Federal Reserve cutting rates. But what condition is the economy going to be in when they eventually do that? Moving on to Netflix. Company started the week at $6.30, down 1.25%. Finished the week at $6.22, ahead of the company's earnings next week. Now, Netflix is going to undergo a major restructuring in its film department. Now, you might recall that Netflix hired movie producer Dan Lin. That was to replace the previous chief of the movie department, and it looks like about 15 people might be laid off in the restructuring. So Netflix clearly maybe just thinking maybe it's time for a change, or they're just simply not happy with their film productions, and we'll see what happens with Netflix. Now, interesting deal here, kind of a head scratcher. Paramount Global might acquire Sundance for about $5 billion in stock. I saw today Paramount Global is one of the most shorted stocks in the S&P 500. It's currently sitting at a 52-week low. One of the reasons why people are shorting the stock is that you are likely going to have a dilutive round of fundraising in order to get this $5 billion deal done. Now, it will give Paramount more assets and maybe make the company more value from an asset perspective. It also might shore up the balance sheet a little bit, putting a little cash in the pocket. But if you're an existing shareholder, looks like you're going to get diluted. Moving on to NVIDIA, started the week at $871 and some change. The AI chip maker just chugging right along, up 1.2%, finished the week at $881 and some change. Now, Intel, AMD, other chip stocks, they were lower this week as China continues to it's a tit-for-tat situation here in the United States as we have controls on lithography equipment and the types of chips that can make it into China. Well, China is saying, well, we're going to phase out using AMD and Intel chips inside of our country, and we'll see where this goes. Some of this is being priced in. If you get a reversal in this decision, like the two countries come together or China changes its mind, that certainly would be bullish for most of these stocks, particularly AMD and Intel in the shorter term. You get a change in administration here in the United States and maybe changes the stance on this type of policy. That could also be bullish for those companies as well. Now, Intel unveiled the Gaudi 3 AI accelerator, and this says it's setting up a race with NVIDIA. That's like me saying I hit 35 golf balls today on the golf range, and the competitors at the Masters are starting to get a little nervous. That is absolutely not true. While the Gaudi AI accelerator, it did deliver some better performance on average than NVIDIA's H100 chip, there's going to be very few companies out there that are looking for the Gaudi 3 chip. And also, NVIDIA is rolling out their new GB200 chip here very soon as well. This was also tested on Meta's previous open source language model, and with the new one coming out, we'll see how that new chip performs. Moving on to Google, for the week at 153, boom, up nearly 3% to finish the week at 157, surpassing, at least briefly, a $2 trillion market cap for the search engine giant. Now, the company also unveiling its in-house Axion chips as it looks to continue to cut cost for AI and its reliance on NVIDIA, really AMD and Intel as well, as these were CPU chips, I believe, that are going to be put inside of Google's data centers available later this year. You were just seeing a custom silicon wave. You have announcements from Meta this week. You had Google. There are just a lot of companies, and Microsoft and Amazon have their own projects as well. Not that it's going to completely decimate NVIDIA's business, but that was the topic of today's Bleeding Edge newsletter, is that is actually the real threat. It's not a chip made by Intel. It's actually these multi-trillion-dollar companies being able to make their own chips. Now, Google's going to invest $1 billion to improve U.S. and Japan digital connectivity by 2 subsea cables. That's got to be a great business. You get out on the boat and you bury this cable in the ocean. One thing I got to think is maybe satellite communications can maybe supersede this or one day make this obsolete. We'll see what happens there. Moving on to Microsoft. Start of the week at 423 and some change. Basically flat to finish the week. We'll call that at 422. Now, unfortunately, hackers in the great country of Russia hacked Microsoft, and they went through the email system of Microsoft to steal correspondence between officials and the company. Microsoft, a little bit of a black eye from a cybersecurity perspective. Certainly good news probably for other cybersecurity stocks out there. Microsoft perked up as Morgan Stanley sees its earnings doubling by 2029. I don't exactly know the EPS at Microsoft at the current time. Looks like maybe it's about $12 per share, and the analysts are projecting maybe up to $24 per share by 2029, which again would take a forward price to earnings at about 36 down to, I suppose, about the 20 range. Now, moving on to Tesla, start of the week at 170. A little bit of a gain for Tesla. Is there about a week and a half, I think about 11 days from earnings on Tesla. Company finished the week at 171. Now, this broke last week as I'm editing the video. Sometimes pretty cool news breaks, but we just kick it to the next week unless it's like gigantic news. In this case, I don't think it is. I think this headline's just a little deceiving. It says Tesla plans to unveil its Robotaxi service on August 8th. I don't think you're going to be able to hop in a Tesla Robotaxi on August 8th, other than I think the Hyperloop in Las Vegas is operational. Maybe there's some other services out there, but it's really just going to be an event to kind of hype it up. That's going to be all the way in August 8th, and we'll see if Tesla's really ready to do something here. I think is back in 2019, Elon Musk said that robo-taxis were a year away, and here we are sitting in 2024, and it'll be late 2024 when we finally get this announcement. We'll see if Tesla is ready for prime time and if robo-taxis are as well. Now, Elon Musk, ex-AI company, is in talks to raise $3 billion in funding at an $18 billion valuation, which might be worth more than his stake in Twitter at the current time. Now, moving over to the technical segment of the show. Tell you what, folks, here's the S&P 500. Little bit of a rollover. We'll see if we get follow through next week. I tell you what, you're sitting on a bed of support. If you get follow through in the S&P 500, that should put you on high alert, because what do we talk about here on the show? Here's a beautiful uptrend in the S&P 500, really intact since October 2022. You want to stretch it out to a longer time frame. I mean, this is just the continuation of whatever, a 30 or 40-year uptrend on the S&P 500. So when an index or a stock is in a beautiful formed uptrend and you get a breakdown in that trend, you are looking to buy. This isn't PayPal. This isn't Rivian. This isn't Lucid stock. We're not buying stocks that are in a downtrend and are dumping out the bottom. We're looking to buy this, and the first level on the S&P 500 is just south of 4,900. You're just 200 points away. That's not where I would back up the truck. You get further pullbacks. That's where you make your move, but just to keep in mind, you better be paying really close attention, because since of October of 2022, not quite 2 years, you've had like 2 days to catch the S&P 500 at the bottom of the trend. More than likely, you'll find footing somewhere here in the 48-49 level. That's probably also will coincide with a Fed pivot or a rate cut, if you will. Now, Meta's looking strong, though. Meta is going to report their earnings in 12 days, still looking strong. We thought maybe we get a little bit of a breakdown, but no, we pushed higher. We're flagging out. We're looking for earnings really at 11 days. Whether or not this one can push higher, any breakdown in Meta really should be bought. Really interesting chart pattern here for Apple. Caught a huge bid right on a bed of support. So we have this red line, which I'm going to change to purple so you can see it on the screen really easily. This purple line, I don't know who's stepping in. It could be individual shareholders. It could be funds. It could be Apple themselves. We know they obviously have a multi-billion, they buy back tens of billions of dollars stock, not every year, every quarter they're buying this back. Could be that they're stepping in here. You've seen increased volume right here at 169. You pushed it up. Now, you didn't really surpass the higher highs, and so the stock is still kind of in no man's land, but there's clearly a bid here at 169. The risk is if the bid dries up at 169, you are going to go probably much lower on Apple, probably south of 150. If the bid holds, you're probably pushing all the way back up to 197. So the risk reward is actually pretty good for Apple at these levels. You buy it at these levels, stop loss shortly underneath it, and you try to play to the upside. Apple going to report their earnings in 20 days. Moving on to Amazon. This is, we've talked about for a while. Seems like we had a destiny to go back to the all-time highs. Looks like we pretty much did with Amazon. Dips in Amazon should be bought. The e-commerce giant reports their earnings in just 13 days. Netflix looking absolutely beautiful. Still in this really tight channel here. We'll see what happens on earnings. Again, those are about 6 days from now. If you crap out the bottom of this trend, you should have buying opportunities right in that 550 range. If it's a good earnings report, you're pushing the all-time highs back up over 700. Now, NVIDIA looking a little toppy to me, looking a little bit like the S&P 500. And I know this is like a breakneck trend, but that trend that you've been on really since January of basically the beginning of the year, that trend is basically over. You've broken that. Now, it doesn't mean you can't resume it or continue to push higher. NVIDIA doesn't report their earnings for 40 days, but we will hear from other semiconductor companies, including Intel and AMD. In the meantime, we'll see where this company is able to go. Breakdowns in NVIDIA can be very large because obviously you've made such a large move. There's such a huge price action in this one. The pullbacks can be pretty deep, and the pullbacks should be bought. Now, speaking of pullbacks and buying, man, you had a great opportunity with Google. This is just a beautifully formed technical pattern. We've just confirmed another higher high. Google reports their earnings in 11 days. If they're bad or they disappoint the street, we could see a rejection here. Any rejection back into like the 140s should be bought. Now, Microsoft's looking absolutely just beautifully. Higher highs, higher lows. It's at a really kind of a pivot point, if you will. It'd be actually kind of surprising, I think, for Microsoft to be able to just blast up and push higher, although we've seen that with Meta, Netflix, and other stocks that we've been following here. Obviously, any pullbacks in Microsoft, like pretty much all of these stocks, should be bought. Now, the one exception is Tesla, because as you've seen over the past several years, pointing out this numerous times, really for 4 years, the stock has been going sideways. Now, the sideways momentum is from 100 all the way to 400, but more recently, we've been making an ugly downtrend. Lower highs, lower lows. We have not confirmed that we're out of this, so you've got to assume that it continues. One thing that could potentially help Tesla a little bit is they've got earnings in 11 days. The problem is we already know the delivery numbers. We already know that it's not going to be great. That can take the sting off the downside, but I'm not exactly sure what Elon Musk and crew can say on a conference call to turn things around. Tesla really going to have to deliver something tangible, not just an announcement or a press release, to move the shares higher sometime soon. Guys, that was a FAANG Stock recap show for Friday, April 12th. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I'll be sitting on the couch watching golf. Let me know down in the comments what you'll be doing. Until next week, good luck with your investments.